So Jeff, how do you build a house from scratch?
Oh yeah, it's a very big undertaking, and I think what you start with is finding the right property, making sure that that property is safe to build on, it's at the right elevation, and it's going to be able to be insured at the levels you want to be insured at. Next is really finding the house plan that you want. I think pre-construction is very important to building a house. In the end, the build process itself should just be execution and tracking. It's really what is it that you want to build, and how do you want it to look in the end, because change orders can drive a lot of time and money overall, and frustration in the process for both the builder and the homeowner.
Yeah. And you just built your own house. So you with an engineering background and the contracting background, like how did you let someone else build your house, and how much did you supervise it?
I'm a very detail-oriented person, so we were able to nail down a schedule right from the get-go. We all agree it's a tentative schedule with weather and resources dependent. But I was on site every day that I could be. So when I wasn't traveling for work, I was on site, and I would talk to the builder when I saw issues or had questions. And I aligned with the builder up front. Because builders, that drives a lot of time and a lot of frustration from the builder. And so I said, do you want me to point out when I see something wrong or when I have a question, or do you want me to kind of save him up for a once a week meeting? Right. And he said, just shoot me a text of what your question is. And so I think that's the best format of working with any builder, is to align on the communication frequency and format, so that you can make sure that there's driving a great relationship throughout the process, because there will be times that it'll be frustrating for one or both. And so maintaining that good relationship is very critical.
Yeah. John, question.
I do. Yes, absolutely, Jeff. So here in the low country, I know we have certain challenges, and right off the bat, you mentioned our soil. So tell us a little bit about the soil and what kind of extra steps that we might have to take here in the low country.
Yeah, if you're in a development that has houses that are already being built, you can generally feel pretty good about the soil. Like if you have a house on either side of you, you can generally feel pretty good about the soil. If you're going to a piece of property that doesn't have anything nearby, like you're buying some oceanfront or waterfront property that is in the middle of nowhere, you definitely want to have a geological study done to make sure that that land is safe to build on. In the end, it is expensive and it is time consuming on the front end, but it can cause you a lot of headache on the back end as well if you don't address it.
Certainly. And how about foundation work? Is there something special we have to do here with our soils in terms of the foundation?
It depends on the foundation quality, or I'm sorry, the soil quality. Okay. There are houses that can be built on pillars. You see that a lot up north in like Myrtle Beach area. Here, where I like to do is more pad. So like a unipad, where the footers and the pad are all one structure, so that it prevents a lot of the settling. And if it settles as a solid structure versus, one pillar settling more than the other, and it starts to drive, drywall cracks and other things in the house beyond the normal wear and tear.
Got it.
So from the just elementary perspective of how the house is built, right? We find a good piece of soil, we test the soils if it doesn't have an established neighborhood feel to it. And then when we start the construction process and we feel like we've got a good foundation, I just don't think the general public understands how it comes together. You hear about subflooring and walls and plumbing, and then there's a leak and construction. It's like, if you had to give a sequence from the ground up, foundation, like what's the number one thing in your mind that you would discern on looking at a foundation? You just mentioned the unipad. I don't think anybody really understands that. Can you just explain a little bit more about how that actually gets put together?
Sure. So footers can be just the perimeter of the home or anything underneath columns that need to be structured. So it doesn't have to be one solid pad underneath the house. It can actually be just the footers and then dirt, and then you go in and you put pads underneath separately. A unipad is actually just one pour. So it's the footers and the floor all poured together. And so that's what it means from a unipad standpoint. I mean, when you start from the beginning, once you get all of your permits and you have all of your designs and all of your architectural and your soil samples done, footers are going to be the first thing. Footers and foundation are going to be the first thing that's going to happen. And those can go in very quickly once they're started. Obviously, they have to come out and get formed. And then typically that's an inspection point. And I think in the timeline, especially when you're working with your builder, it's very important to remember that there are certain required audits or permit verification, site verification to be done by the town. And so that's like one of those points. And you can't actually call and request an inspection until it's ready. And sometimes they're 2 and 3 weeks out. It just depends on how busy the municipality is. And so it's important to remember that in the timeline. But once you have the foundation, I'll kind of just quickly go through what would happen at that point. You would then frame it, which is the wood framing from everything to the walls, the interior walls to the roof. That generally goes up fast and is the most exciting to watch as a homeowner, because you can actually see the structure going up and it's very quick. So every day you go, you see something new. You have another level of your house, etc. Then you really kind of get to the slower interior work that seems like nothing's being done even when people are on site all the time, which would be like your electrical rough-in, your HVAC rough-in, your drywall, your roof, you're just wrapping the house. And then again, at that point, it's really that once all of that is done, which is an arduous task, might be even up to a month or so for all that to get done. Then you start to get into the fun stuff again, which would be like windows and doors and siding, and you start to see your house really come together. And all of that's happening. And once all of that is waterproof, which means you have your siding, windows in place, that's when you start to see the interiors come together. So all your cabinetry in your bathrooms and kitchen are coming in, all of your appliances start to arrive, and you can really start to see the house come together. And then it gets a little boring again for a while as they're doing trim work around the entire house, very time consuming, but very important. Light installs, finishing the HVAC installs. And it's really from I mentioned this at the beginning, but it's really the pre-construction phase that I think is very important, is building out this plan so that you can target the resources and using a tool. There's tons of tools out there. I think for the commercial building, I use Procore quite a bit. For residential building, Builder Trend is a really simple, easy tool that you can share with customers and other trades. If you decide to do stuff on your own, when I was building my house, I actually built a pool and fence and a dock that I didn't want to pay the markup of a GC to do. And so I actually GC'd that myself, and using the Builder Trend with my builder, and then connecting with the building of the pool, did the same thing with the Builder Trend. And we were actually able to kind of intertwine those two together so that the builder knew what was going on with the pool. And we didn't like schedule for the big trucks to be in on the day they were pouring the driveway, for example. And so be able to do a lot of that coordination up front and align those two parties was very critical.
Yeah. Systems. I find that if you do anything twice, it's probably not a bad idea to build a system. But this home construction industry, residentially, it's always frustrated me a little bit just on how it seems that every single builder has their own little recipe for how they do it. But it seems like there's so many of the same things that happen in the process, and that if there's a way that builders are taught how to build, if you were to structure systems that were going to just make everybody's life easier, like you just mentioned how you intertwine those programs a little bit, you're doing, so it's almost like you were a subcontractor to your own project, facilitating some of the landscaping, the pool, the fence. If you were to give a systemized approach to really, as a best practice, how it should work, how residential building should be supervised on the back end, so that the homeowners really aren't frustrated with the fact that they don't know what's going on and that something doesn't fall through the cracks. So, because we're all human, right? And it's the human errors that usually create the lawsuits, the problem, the flashing issues. Like, how would you run those systems on the back end if you could just had a blank canvas to make it work?
Well, I mean, my last company where we were doing roughly 1,000 renovations at a time, we actually built some reporting systems where it required, if we weren't able to go on site, so obviously when I have 1,000 projects going on, I can't be on site at every single project. We actually we use Builder Trend for that as well. We actually asked the builder to upload pictures on a daily basis so that we could see the work that was being done centrally. And we could see in the timeline, they would update the timeline on a weekly basis. And so we could see in the timeline if it was starting to slip. And then those processes could feed back to us of, hey, this project slipped. And so then we could dig a little bit deeper into that. I think when you're building your own house, though, that's not really necessary. I think really the key thing is to get on site as much as possible, because even if the builder's building it exactly to the plan, you may not have thought, as a homeowner, not everyone knows what a plan turns into in 3-dimensional, right? And so even if it's exactly what's on the drawings, you may come in there and say, hey, this is not even close to what I want. And then you can have a conversation on maybe a change order to adjust it, because in that scenario, they're building it correctly. Or in my scenario, we did a lot of changes to the drawing up front. I was on site and I found that they were using the wrong plans. And so I was able to go to the builder that day and say, hey, they didn't make the changes that were in this plan. You should probably let them know. And so they didn't have to then, already now tear down more drywall and remove electrical. All of that was done very quickly in the next day, and saved the builder a lot of money and saved me a lot of time and hassle.
Yeah,
and I think that's what drives these builders. It depends on how many they're building at a time. Unless they have just one, they're on other jobs, so they're not there. So even if the subs are using a different drawing, they won't know about it until they get on site. And so I think understanding, like we talked about, the communication method and mechanism early, I think it's also important to understand what are the expectations that builder has in your mind and what he knows he's going to be able to support on the back end. I think during COVID, building kind of went crazy, right? And the interest rates were low. And so, my builder had a lot of projects going on, and it was tough to get subs, and it was tough to get, and I would sometimes tell him that his subs weren't on site. And so I think being a partnership with the builder is very important, and not necessarily for, to save money, because in the end, it doesn't really save any money, but it's really going to drive time.
Yeah, the money thing, I think, sometimes confuses people when they're creating their plans. You talked about pre-construction setup. So pre-construction setup, if you're not familiar, is you've got to have an architect, or you've got to have a plan that's permitted. You've got to put some things behind it: the mechanical, electrical, plumbing plan, lighting plan. You've got to have the structural integrity plan. Then you've got to satisfy the towns that you're going to be in to pre-permit to get it where it can go. The challenge, I think, is when people say, oh, I don't want to spend a lot of money on a full set of plans, which then hamstrings the builder a little bit. So instead of them being able to dial in the cost all the way, they put in allowances. And I think that's where that creates that chicken or egg type of thing. Is, would you rather have a fully drawn set of plans that has every single level of detail, so that everybody that's quoting the job is giving you ironclad numbers, or you would want a builder set, which is like a light set to get through permitting, and then you end up with allowances that may or may not be realistic, especially in this appliance inflationary environment. So do you have a preference if you want a full set of plans, or if you want a builder set, since obviously you're a builder?
Yeah, I mean, a full detailed set of plans is a requirement in my mind, right? Like anytime that there is question, and not incorrectly or not intentionally, like a builder or a sub is going to build it whatever saves him the most money.
Yeah.
Because most of the time these subs have quoted a job. Subs aren't time and labor, right? Like it's not a cost plus model, which some GCs run. They've been given a price, and if they can do it for half the price, they make more money, right? So if it's not there, then they choose what it is, and they may not choose what is the best quality. And so I think having that, and again, not maliciously, just because it doesn't call for anything, so someone must not care. And so they're always going to put something in that's safe and meets code, but sometimes safe and meeting code is not high quality. And I think it's important, if you're looking for high quality, to make sure that you have that dialed in up front.
Right. So you're a contractor by trade, and you can build your own house. You've got experience and you're comfortable. So you can build your own as a principal owner of the property. You can also build for third-party independent people that wanted to do it. Now, John, in the years past and the years that I've known you, you've done a lot of your own managing of your own projects, and you've been able to do that because you're a principal with ownership in your own property. Where do you think, how often should homeowners try to really kind of do their own principal job, or when they should reach out and say, this is over my head, I need to have a full-blown contractor?
Yeah, I think it comes down to experience. I mean, if you're experienced with the building process, say you grew up and your dad was a carpenter or a builder, or your grandfather, and you're comfortable with the process, I think it's definitely something that you could take on your own and hire some trusted subcontractors. But if you're a novice, and this is your first, I wouldn't do it. I would hire a Jeff Rains for sure, and maybe follow Jeff Rains's process and get comfortable with the process, and then maybe you can do your next deal, as a principal contractor on your own. But if it's your first deal and you've never done it before, I would certainly hire a professional like Jeff.
Yeah, I think a lot of
Or
stuff.
if it's not your primary job, right? Like if you have
Yeah.
another job doing this on the side, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do your own subs. And there's a lot of risk that comes with that because, obviously you can pull your own permits as a builder, but like, are your subs licensed and bonded? And if they walk off the job, how are you going to find another one? And so if it is your primary job and you're a builder by trade and you've done it, multiple times and you have the time to sub your own, then I think that makes it a ton of sense. That's certainly something that I would do. And you also have to have the luxury of having another place to stay, right? So you got to take care of that as well. And so I think from my perspective, I totally am aligned with John. Like if you are a licensed contractor and have built 20 homes and you have nothing else going on, I think doing it yourself makes a lot of sense. Or if you're doing it as a business where you're building a home as a spec and you're going to flip it, it makes a ton of sense. But if you're doing it as like a part, or you have another job, a primary job, and you want to build your own house, I think it really starts to come down to risk versus reward.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think my progression of homes is my third home. My first home was a starter home built by a track builder. And I think I got to pick 3 things that I could alter: the color of the walls, the countertop finishes, and maybe the faucet choices. But they said, here are 5 choices. You can only pick these 5 choices, or obviously it's going to cost you more money. And even if it did cost more money, they wouldn't deviate because they had their supply chain, they had everything like that. The second home was a custom home, but I found that the neighborhood had a certain price point where you couldn't just try to build more than the neighborhood could absorb cost-wise, or you would have, when I sold that house, I remember thinking, I'm glad I pulled back on some of the finishes of this house because I would have been so out of the ballpark of the value of the home. And I used a specific builder that kind of did that, what I'd call at that time, middle of the road value. And then the final home is custom built where you got to pick everything under the sun, which the challenge was not always understanding that if you said, yes, I'd like to change this from A to B, just how quickly cost can change, or you just added 6 months to wait on one little piece. And John, you just finished a renovation, right, on a beautiful home. What have you seen just in things that you thought you knew were going to go a certain way, but I'm sure you caught a few surprises along the way?
Yes, big surprises. We've all heard about the supply chain issues we've had, COVID and post-COVID. Well, we ran into it with our renovation. Windows, for instance, windows we thought would take 6 weeks, ended up taking 6 months. We're still waiting for a refrigerator and freezer that we ordered in October of 2021. So luckily we have a refrigerator and freezer that are still working and are just plugged into the new cabinetry. But so those types of things are always surprising. So again, if you hire a professional like Jeff, he knows of these issues. And so he'll order the windows at the appropriate time. And if you're doing this on your own, you might be surprised when you order your windows and, oh, sorry, 6 months. And so here's your house. Like Jeff said, it's not dried in for 6 months. You're going to have a real problem with all that woodwork getting wet day after day. So you have to have these steps in place to know when to order things, for sure.
Yeah, timeline management.
Yeah.
Jeff, anything to add? Any last takeaways here for the audience?
No, I think there's something to be said for a fully custom home, and there's something to be said for having limited options. So I think when you meet with the builder. It's important to understand kind of quality, time, and budget. Those are three things that usually you can only choose two to prioritize. And if you're looking for, say, high-end appliances, like that's where you're usually running into custom supply chain challenges. And there's simple things you can do at the beginning of a project where you can pre-order some if you know that there's supply chain issues, and there's certain things that you can't, right? Like I had a similar problem with one specific, impact sliding glass door that slowed up my project, even though I was on top of it day over day over day. And those things you just can't avoid. And so knowing and having some flexibility on your design could also drive a lot of time.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, if people have questions for you about residential construction, what's the best way for them to reach you?
I would suggest email as a good start. So my email is rainej1@gmail.com. I'm usually able to respond to an email within a day or two. So I'm usually pretty responsive to that.
Yeah, definitely. Even if it's just an innocent question, run it by Jeff. Jeff helped me personally build a playhouse for my kids when they were very small. I don't think he had a scratch of information. And I thought I was going to bring a lot to the table. I basically was holding pieces of wood and maybe grabbed a few nails here and there. But the way that he saw it in his mind, didn't even draw out a plan. And we built it in one day, and it was exceptional. It blew me away. It was one of the funniest, one of the funnest experiences of my life, was to watch how well some people just can see things and some people can't. And I think the fact that the way that you're built and the engineering background, your engineering mind, I know my kids got a lot of great swing hours on that. So I appreciate that. And guys, give Jeff a call if you have any questions, or an email rather, and I'll put in the show notes the contact information for Jeff. But Jeff, thanks for being here. John, thanks for being here. I hope that everybody found this information useful, and we'll have detailed notes underneath.
Thanks a lot, David. Thanks, John.